Hello. So I have another message tying to the last ones about the counterfeit and spouse. The Lord has just been talking to me so much lately about this. So there's a few things that he's been saying to me about this. But for right now, he's just wanting me to mostly talk about this one little part. So he's also saying now, I've put out a couple words recently in regards to this, and so they kind of all tie together. So obviously, like, one could fit for you and maybe another one, but the Lord is saying, sorry, yawning. The enemy already doesn't want me to talk. The Lord is saying that if one of those previous messages clicked for you or resonated or made sense in your situation, that most likely the other ones will too, and this one included, right? So he's saying that another reason why the spouse and counterfeit are together or have been together all this time, the counterfeit has tried to make it out like as if it's because the spouse likes them more, like either is more attracted to the counterfeit than yourself as the spouse, or that they have more pull over the spouse, or that they have things that you perhaps they think that you don't have. And so again, as we already know, it all comes from the same source. So because the counterfeit is ran by the devil, as we already know, the counterfeit doesn't understand things in a emotionally healthy or mentally healthy or spiritually healthy way. Everything that they do in their life comes from an unhealthy place, right? Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, etc. So therefore, say if you have a home and this counterfeit has a home, this counterfeit thinks that their home is better than yours, even if it's not, they think it is, or it must be better, or the spouse must think it's better, or even if it is, it doesn't matter. They weigh things on things like that. Or like, say you're attractive and this counterfeit's attractive, maybe the counterfeit's more attractive than you, or maybe the counterfeit is less attractive than you, right? But the counterfeit thinks that because the spouse is giving them attention either equal to or greater than what they presume that the spouse is giving to you, that they're in turn, that must mean that they're more attractive than you, and that you're not attractive, and that the spouse is not attracted to you, even though the spouse is like highly attracted to you, and probably, if anything, maybe actually more attracted to you than this counterfeit. Because here's the thing, is that if this counterfeit had it in the bag, right? If this counterfeit was more attractive, if this counterfeit had the better house, if this counterfeit had the better career and the better this and the better that, and every single thing with this counterfeit was top tier, then why would the spouse entertain you in the first place, right? They would just, it's an obvious clear choice that this counterfeit is queen bee, and they would run off with this counterfeit, right? But yet this counterfeit is not in that position, and that's because you're the queen bee or king bee or whatever you want to say, the queen or king in this situation. You're the true spouse. But this counterfeit, what this counterfeit does is this counterfeit fills a void. And so this counterfeit serves many, many purposes, right? And the Lord has been revealing to me all the many purposes that this counterfeit serves or provides, right? But none of them are actually the real, true, genuine connection, right? The Lord is just showing me that scene from Cinderella where, as we know as the viewer of the movie, the prince dances with Cinderella at the ball and knows that that's the one for him. But before he comes back across her, there's of course all these counterfeits coming across, and in the movie it's portraying these counterfeits that while these counterfeits have money, they're not Cinderella. And while maybe they have fancier dresses than her, and they have more, they can get their hair done, they can get this done, and they invest more into themselves physically because they're very vain. They are, in Cinderella, the counterfeits care less about the prince's feelings and the true connection with the prince. They care about the fact that he has money, that he's a prince, that he's attractive, that he hosts a ball. Like, it's for them, it's all the surface level things that they're attracted to about this prince, whereas the prince had a true bona fide connection with Cinderella, right? And the prince could have had many choices. He knew that, but he wanted the connection that he had with Cinderella. So even though he could have been with 100 different ladies, right, that there was only the one for him, right, which was her, right, one of a kind. And the counterfeits could not understand, because they're like, well, Cinderella doesn't have this palace, we do. And Cinderella doesn't have these fancy dresses, we do. And Cinderella has to work and do chores morning, noon, and night. We don't have to do anything, you know. We are able to afford our hair and nails getting done, and this, that, and the third. But the prince wasn't into all of that, right? He could have been, but he wasn't, because maybe the prince was superficial before the ball, but it doesn't matter. By the time that the ball came and he met Cinderella, the superficiality was gone. He wanted that connection that had occurred between her to him and him to her, right? And it was genuine, special, and one of a kind. These counterfeits are a dime a dozen. He could come across all of them, right? And all that they have in common is that they don't have this connection with him, but what they all share is vanity. They all can do their hair. They all can wear fancy clothes. They all can do their nails. You know what I mean? And that is obviously not, maybe the prince is looking for that in the past, but once he's found her and experienced that connection, he's no longer looking for that any longer, right? So that's the thing, is that this counterfeit serves purpose when it comes to your spouse dealing with the superficiality. And that's kind of been the battle all this time. And I've made words about this in the past too, is that, like I said in the past word I made there, your spouse has one foot into the healed waters and in the kingdom of God because of the experience and the connection that they've had with you. But then simultaneously, they also have a foot still in their old ways in the world and in Satan's kingdom, so to speak, because of the past, 30, 40, 50 years they've been living, doing what they've been doing. Just a second. Sorry about that. That was my little guy. Yeah, so anyways, now I forget where I was. You know, sometimes I know that the devil is sending distractions my way too. Things going wrong with my voice, distractions, noise, you name it. Interruptions, just so I don't get the word out. But I digress. So your spouse has one foot still in the old ways, right? So what's been going on is that this counterfeit, like I said in the past word there, has been using this situation to their advantage, to where they're like, well, I know that there's this connection between these two spouses, but this spouse isn't with that person yet. They're still, mixing and mingling with me. So that must mean that I'm on that level, or I'm greater than, or I'm prettier, or more attractive, or more handsome, or I'm more wealthy, or I'm more blessed or abundant and more spiritual, and all this stuff that's not true at all. Like, were the counterfeits in Cinderella any of those things more than Cinderella? No, they weren't, right? And that's why that movie spent so much time showing us her character and developing her character, was so that then we were able to see her for who she was in comparison to these counterfeits, right? Because if we had just seen the counterfeits and her for the same amount of time, we may have thought that these counterfeits had something on her, we're giving her a run for her money. But because Cinderella was developed, we saw her character throughout the film. That's what showed us to see that she had traits and things that these counterfeits just don't have. Not to mention that, irregardless from all those superficial, physical, exterior things like money, career, clothes, etc., she ended up having the bona fide true connection with the prince, which was ultimately what the prince was looking for and needed and wanted and hadn't experienced before in his past, right? So the Lord is saying is that your spouse has been scared. They've been scared of this connection. Not only are they scared because they've been hurt in their past, and so they're scared to get hurt again or to fall again and things like that, or to suffer situations that they've maybe been through. They've been traumatized from their past. You've been traumatized from your past. And because of that, that's one of the Lord is saying, top 3 reasons why this spouse has been running away from you, so to speak, or continuing to play hot and cold, or continuing to entertain this counterfeit or any of these counterfeits, it's not because these counterfeits have something on you. It's because, even though they think they do, they're wrong. It's because the spouse themselves is scared of what this connection means and could entail for them. Plus, it's deeper than that. It's not like as if it's just you and the spouse would be in love and then their heart's on the line and blah blah blah. It's not just that. It's also that the spouse knows that, the spouse, he or she, is going to have to change their ways. Because you're a tall order. You're not these counterfeits. These counterfeits would take because the counterfeits are superficial, and your spouse has been superficial their whole life, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however old they are, and however long they've been around, and however long they've been dating. They've been having a sense of superficiality for X amount of time, right? These counterfeits are also superficial, so therefore your spouse doesn't truly care about these counterfeits. Your spouse thinks that they do because these counterfeits are filling a void in several ways, but in one of the ways is that they're allowing your spouse to basically run from their fears, right? These counterfeits are a comfort zone. They're not the right zone, but they're a comfort zone. The Lord is showing me, like, say somebody who's overweight, and what they really don't need is more fatty foods, right? They don't need more fatty foods. What they actually technically need is exercise and diet, right? But that's not their comfort zone. So technically, if the person that's overweight, if they continue to indulge in fatty foods, they're not going to ever have a comfortable life. They're just going to continue to get bigger and bigger, and therefore subsequently more uncomfortable. But in the moment, at the time, because of past pains and traumas, the eating of the fatty foods is providing a comfort for the person. So therefore the food is a comfort zone, right? And so when somebody comes along and intervenes and says, okay, I'm going to take away these foods, put you on a crazy diet, a crash diet, you need to start exercising, the person shies away from that. And it's not because they don't want to lose weight. They know that that's what they want deep down, and that's what's healthiest and best for them. It's not because they enjoy being big and uncomfortable getting in their clothes and in their vehicle and things like that and feeling sick. It's not that at all. The very thing that they're pushing away and turning away from, they know is the very thing that they need, the very thing that's going to make them the healthiest. However, their comfort zone, because for so long they've those internal feelings have been subdued via these fatty foods. So it's kind of like that vicious cycle, right? Where it's like the food provided the comfort for them, and so because of that they continue to turn to those foods, but those foods are making them continue to get bigger and bigger, which is in turn making them actually more uncomfortable. So in the moment, in those 5 minutes, it feels like it's the healthy, comfortable, right choice to make. But the next day, when they're feeling guilty or feeling sluggish or, lethargic or whatever, or nauseous, they feel like, oh, that wasn't the right choice to make. But then they default back, right? So the Lord is showing that as like an example, as to try to illustrate what I'm trying to say here, is that is kind of what these counterfeits do, and these key counterfeits. They think that they're helping this person, but are donuts and ice cream helping a person that's overweight? No, they're not, right? That's like these counterfeits, is that they represent like donuts and ice cream to an overweight person. Like, oh, I'm giving you what you want, I'm giving you what you need. But in essence, it's not really something healthy. It's toxic. It's not something good that your spouse really needs or wants. And they know deep down that they don't really want or need that. What they really want and need is something healthy and to make a change in their lives, because for so long they've been in this rut and in this routine. But just like the person that's overweight, it's a tall order and it's a big undertaking and very scary to them and fearful for them to get out of the comfort zone. It's not scary to eat better. It's not scary to work out or exercise or, get extra steps in every day. But what is scary is knowing that it's a complete and total lifestyle change. Those friends of yours that are also overweight, you'll probably have to stop hanging out with them. Not because they're bad people per se, but because how can somebody get fit and turn their life around and adopt a healthy lifestyle whilst maintaining friendships and close connections with others who represent the exact opposite? So while you're sitting there trying to eat your salads, they're crashing down on the donuts and ice cream that you always ran to in the past, right? You also know that it's going to mean that you're going to have to get up earlier to get that workout in. It's also going to mean that you're going to have to stop eating those late night snacks in bed watching TV. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the undertaking is all the other things that come with it, the change of lifestyle. But it's a commitment that you make to decide. So you have a choice, right? You have free will. The choice is yours. Do you want to continue? You're already overweight. You're already feeling sick. Things are going from bad to worse. Do you want to continue to consume the things you're consuming and just keep getting deeper down the hole you're already in, dig yourself in deeper? Or do you want to dig your heels and commit and make a decision and a choice once and for all, because nobody else can do it for you but you, and to turn your life around and make some changes, right? So that's the thing, is that you're like, that's just an analogy. Thank you, Lord, that the Lord's giving me, because I see what he's saying. It makes perfect sense. It's so like these counterfeits and the lifestyle your spouse leads is likened to like overweight person with a big cake. Like, it's, looks good in the moment, tastes great at the time, seems what's the best, seems like it's fulfilling, seems like it's satisfying, seems like what is needed or whatever. But in reality, that's the actual opposite of what's actually needed at the time, right? And if we are where we're at in our state and we continue to turn to that cake time and time and time again, we're just going to get even deeper and further and more off course, the course that God wants you on, than you even are today, right? So that's where your spouse is at this crossroads, right? But then on the other hand, your spouse is enticed by the change and the connection, and how things could be healthy for the first time in a long time. And the other thing too is they've needed to mature, right? Obviously, we all know that you think differently when you're, in your 30s than you did in your 20s. You think differently in your 40s than you did in your 30s. You think differently in your 50s than you did in your 40s. So that is the other thing too, is that your spouse needed time to mature and take this on, because asking this spouse 5, 10, 15 years ago if they were in the same predicament, without question, even though they knew it wasn't maybe the smartest, wisest choice and it was foolish choice to make, they would have went for the cake every time, because it just was what was in their wheelhouse and comfort zone, right? And it still is, because they've been making these choices and decisions for however long, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, right? So in your spouse's perspective and in their mind, this is a big change, a big risk, a big undertaking in so many ways. Like, they're going to have to settle down. They're going to have to commit. They're going to have to make smarter choices. They're possibly going to have to change their lifestyle, change, choices, things like that, right? And they are. You're not going to accept less, and God won't accept less for you or for them, right? So they have this big looming choice in front of them of, what are you going to do? Are you going to, choose this road and choose yourself ultimately, and choose what's healthy for you and what's best for you, what's positive in an emotional, mental, physical, spiritual way, and choose the path that the Lord has laid out for you and intended for you, and make healthy choices and choices for betterment. And yes, it is going to take some work, and it's going to be challenging, and it's going to take patience and diligence and stuff. Yes, you know that, and the spouse knows this, and ultimately the Lord knows this. But that's a choice that is up to your spouse to make, right? No different than it's up to an overweight person if they want to lose weight or not. Nobody can, and everybody can explain and talk to them or say this, that, and the third, but ultimately it's up to that person as to what direction they're going to take with their own life, right? So that's kind of what the Lord is showing me. On the other hand, what would happen if an overweight person snubbed the idea of getting healthy and fit and continued to lead the unhealthy, toxic, indulgent lifestyle they were living? Well, obviously, eventually it's going to lead to sickness and possibly death, right? It's going to lead to things that are not good. They're going to just decay even more mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? And so that's kind of the crossroads of where your spouse is at. And so ultimately, you representing the light side can say and do all this stuff, and the counterfeits representing the dark side can say and do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's up to your spouse as to what choice they're going to make, right? Ultimately. And so the Lord is just basically saying is that these counterfeits think because they're driven by Satan, that because they turn everything into a competition, and they, like, no different than the movie Cinderella, those sisters thought they had something on Cinderella, and you knew and I knew that they didn't. It was clear and obvious, but they thought that they did, right? They couldn't believe that the prince would appreciate his connection with Cinderella over what they had, but all that they only had to offer was physical, superficial things on the surface, things like money, things like fancy clothing, things like looks, you know what I mean? And they thought that that was enough to have some sort of overage over Cinderella, right? Not realizing and understanding, because they were superficial, that it was the connection that the prince wanted in his life, right? And that was something that those counterfeit sisters could never buy. They could never, they could do this, all the things, all this, all that, all this, but it's never going to compare to the connection that the prince had with Cinderella, right? It was in its own special way, right? And so that's the very same situation here. So yeah, so the Lord is saying is that these counterfeits, they think that they must really be doing something, or they really have this advantage simply because of the fact that the spouse is not with you and as of yet, and they're still entertaining them. Not realizing and understanding that it's no different than an overweight person who's been eating poorly for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're just in that comfort zone. They don't want to eat cakes per se. They just are used to that taste. They, they're nervous to make changes. They're scared what that looks like. They haven't exercised the discipline and the commitment yet to make these changes, right? But that is what the Lord is helping to work with them on, right? And the Lord is saying that the counterfeits see that. They see that that your spouse is like making these, even if they're still doing certain actions the same as they always did before, the counterfeits have started to notice the spouse's changes in subtle ways. They're noticing it, and it's no different than if the overweight person has overweight friends, and for say 5 years the overweight people have been going to the deli every day for lunch and then the bakery every night for pie, etc., and they're in this routine. All of a sudden they start to notice that friend, the overweight friend, is sometimes ordering a salad instead of the donuts, sometimes ordering, a water instead of a milkshake, whatever, right? And they're starting to notice these subtle changes that the person is making slowly but surely to start getting that ball rolling, right? And so that right there is what the counterfeits are trying to do. They're trying to stop that from happening. Now let me ask you this, going back to the scenario about the overweight person with the overweight friends. If one of the overweight friends is trying to make healthier choices via what they eat and drink and they do with their day and stuff like that, they want to start going for walks, whatever else, wouldn't you say that only people that care about them would support them and say, oh great, hopefully, and think to themselves, maybe if this person starts to turn things around, I can turn things around, right? And so that's kind of like going back to my message yesterday about the healing waters, is that because the Lord has been healing some of your toxic, unhealthy traits from your past, some of that healing has rubbed off onto your spouse, and they too have been working on healing their toxic, unhealthy traits from the past. And they also too, the Lord has had it in the design to, for your spouse to try to heal some of these toxic, unhealthy traits with these counterfeits. And then in turn, eventually, hopefully those counterfeits can get to the point where they too are healing the toxic, unhealthy traits in others, right? Via Jesus's healing living waters cycling through. But the Lord is saying that because these counterfeits are superficial and they're toxic and unhealthy themselves, they are likened to no different than the overweight friends with the overweight friend, which that represents like your spouse. They are trying to stop your spouse from making any of these healthy changes, right? And so the Lord's pointing out to me saying, does that really seem like someone who cares about somebody? Because if you really genuinely cared about somebody, then when they're making poor choices, you would say, maybe make mention to it and say like, well, I don't know if those poor choices are the best choices, right? Then if in turn you see them making positive choices, or at least attempting to turn things positively, then you would support them and cheerlead them and say, oh yeah, I noticed you're making some positive choices. That's really great. So the Lord is saying that with your connection with the spouse, you're the type of person that like congratulates positive choices, like supports the spouse making positive choices. And so they run from that because they know that all that's doing, like they want that. That's what they appreciate about you. But they also know that technically that's also having them, have to come towards something that scares them, right? When you're doing that. So when you're like approving positive choices and disapproving poor choices, not just with your spouse, but with anybody, someone who's healed and healthy would see that as a positive thing, like as great characteristics in a person, right? And your spouse knows that these are positive things and great characteristics in you, right? And things like that make up the connection, right? But these counterfeits, they're superficial and they are unhealed and toxic and unhealthy themselves. So therefore, they just want your spouse to continue to remain toxic and unhealthy as well, right? Because they're in the same boat as your spouse is, where you're in one lane and your spouse feels like you're encouraging them to join a lane like that, and while they know that's what's best for them and what maybe they need to do, they're scared to make that lifestyle change. So therefore they just default back to comfort zone, aka these counterfeits, which really aren't serving anyone anything, or it's just filling a void in the moment. No different than how when the overweight person has a bad day at work, they fill that void with a cake, right? It's a comfort thing, right? And maybe it's not what's best and they know it, but it fills the void at the time. That's what these counterfeits are doing. And then in turn, these counterfeits are nervous because if they see your spouse, which they've started to notice some of these changes, they see your spouse going into a similar lane as you, then they feel like they're going to have to go in that lane. And they're feeling the exact same way your spouse is, where your spouse is scared to make this change. They in turn are also scared to make this change. But this is what the Lord is trying to do, is that, again, it's like you're like leading by example, right? It's like, so because you're healing and fixing up, it's like you were overweight once too, and you've made some of these healthy choices, and it's in turn trying to rub off onto your spouse to show them, hey, there is a healthier way. Yes, the choice is yours, just like the choice was mine, but there is a healthier way, an alternative available to you. Well, in turn, the spouse has started to make some of these little tweaks, and these counterfeits are noticing this, and the spouse is kind of now playing like you, where they're showing them, hey, there's this alternative way, and these counterfeits know about this alternative way, but they're not interested in this alternative way because they're even deeper in the pit with Satan than the spouse is. And Satan doesn't want anyone getting healthy. Satan doesn't want anybody to, that's why one of the 7 deadly sins is gluttony, right? Is because that's one of the things, is that Satan wants people to indulge, and not just through food. I'm just using that as an example for this video. But like even when you're drinking, that fills a void, right? That's gluttony, right? As well. Same with like any type of drug use or anything like that, even sex, right? These things can be considered gluttonous, and it's basically just like filling a void, right? And so I know that like gluttony is about food, but you know what I'm saying, you can be gluttonous in many different ways. And then it also starts when we get with money, then it turns into greed and things like that. So these again are the 7 deadly sins. They don't come from God. So that's the thing, is that the Lord is trying to heal so many people, and it started with you, and then also trying to heal this spouse. And so sometimes this spouse is getting healed through their time and experience with you and the connection that they have. But then in the connections that they have with these counterfeits, it's also defaulting them back to said comfort zone and what they're used to and those toxic traits. So one hand represents healthiness and positive choices, and then the other hand represents toxicity and negative choices, right? And so your spouse is kind of being pulled, the Lord is showing like a tug of war, being pulled in one direction and pulled in the other, back and forth. Sometimes the counterfeits pull over and sometimes you pull over, and it just goes back and forth. But like I said, my password there, the time is a ticking where this spouse is going to have to make a decision if they're going to get healthy or not, if they're going to choose the counterfeits options or not, right? They're not going to continuously be in this back and forth tug of war forever. These counterfeits also have a choice as well to choose if they're also going to get healthy or not. You know, if they're going to continue to partake in the tug of war they have as well between basically it's also, you could liken it to a tug of war between the devil and God, right? God's trying to pull one way and the devil's trying to pull the other. It may not seem like that, but that's basically what it comes down to, right? The devil's trying to keep these counterfeits in your spouse in these toxic, unhealthy, poisonous, negative, unhelpful cycles that are based off of superficiality and comfort zones, right? And it's only that way because these people have been doing XYZ for a long time. So they're in this rut and they're in this routine, right? And the devil keeps them satiated with this, no different than how the devil keeps somebody satiated with food, right? Well, on the opposite end, you've made some choices, you've made some changes. And while these changes might have mostly been internal for the most part, that's where it starts. It starts internally, right? Your mind has to think differently. Your heart has to feel differently. You have to make choices from the inside out, not from the outside in, right? And so the switch has to flip somewhere internally first, and then it can follow suit externally, right? So so I hope this is making sense. So basically, these counterfeits are representing everything from the devil's kingdom. They're representing gluttony, they're representing greed, they're representing vanity, they're representing lust, they're representing superficiality, they're representing idolization, you know what I'm saying? And just indulgence, right? Complete indulgence. Whereas you're representing more like positive changes and things like that. And these are things that the spouse is intrigued by and interested by and knows that deep down they need. And even these counterfeits know deep down they need that as well. And that's why they're so drawn to you. These counterfeits are drawn, and the spouse is because the Lord is allowing this drawing so that they can be trying to learn, you know. It's no different than an overweight person. Like I say, if they're around overweight people all the time, or even say alcoholics are around alcoholics all the time, who's going to be the first to stand up and stop the cycle, right? Somebody has to stop the drinking so that they can be the sounding board for those that are still drinking, and somebody has to stop the cycle of, you know, the poor choices so that then they can make the smarter choices so they can lead others to make smarter choices, right? Somebody has to be reformed in order to reform others. So anyways, I hope this is making sense. I'll be back if there's more revelation on this as the Lord leads. There may be, because I mean, he's been really dissecting this to me lately. So I hope it finds who it needs to find. I hope it makes sense. I hope it resonates. I hope it finds you well, and God bless.